Welcome back. You're listening to the Hill by Thieves Theater. I'm Gabriele.
And I'm Nick, and we're Thieves.
That is, beginning in 1981, we called ourselves Thieves Theater. But we didn't just do theater, we did guerrilla conceptual art project, or what we call such a hard time with that word sometimes. Para-theatrical work. Our goal was to disrupt and alter the social and political status quo.
Which means we just like putting sticks into anthills and watching the ants scurry around and adjust to their new reality, their new status quo. The last episode, we outlined part of our trip out west. We had left the tipi, the year-old memorial now, under the care of the residents living on the hill. Mm-hmm. We were worried about how that was going to turn out, especially with all the changes that had taken place. So, I mean, in some ways, essentially, we were leaving the care of it with Spencer, the drug lord, right? I mean,
well, no. I mean, we were counting on the residents, who were practically our family now, to take care of it, take care of their church.
Yeah,
right?
But they also had allowed Panama and the drugs to come in. So anything could have happened. They could have started using the teepee as a place to sell drugs or something. Like.
Nah. That would have been really stupid on Spencer's part. He knew that if he did that, we would just take the teepee down, and he was not stupid. Besides that teepee being there, much to our chagrin, was to his advantage.
Well, yeah.
That's how we were complicit in some.
Yeah. And I mean, along with him claiming he was a doctor, he also was claiming that he really supported what we were doing.
Yeah.
And, you had to believe what he was saying. He said it so sincere.
Well, he was a very intelligent man, Spencer.
Right. And so, like you said, it was complicated. He was complicated, and it complicated our position up there. So, yeah. And, I mean, in some ways, I don't know why we weren't fighting it, except sort of covertly by bringing all the cameras and stuff up.
Well, we were fighting it. We were trying to fight it. Well, with art.
Yeah, well, with art and trying to tell, involving everybody in the art process.
And guess what? Nobody else was fighting it either. And we'll get into that too. Everybody knew what was going on.
Okay, yeah, we will. Next episode.
Right? Okay. Yeah. But also, going out west was our attempt to try to figure out how to leave the hill and all these complications, right? And by visiting Wounded Knee and this Pine Ridge Reservation, the site of the massacre, we were hoping naively, I guess, that we'd be able to hopefully gift the teepee to the Lakota tribe or anyone who was in a better position to represent the dead who the teepee was memorializing. And most importantly, maybe, we wanted to bring it to the land, the earth where it truly belonged, which is the land of the Lakota.
Right. And then throughout the trip, we were checking our phone machine, where we had asked friends from outside the hill to go up and check on the teepee and the situation and make everything was okay. And when we checked messages, we got messages that said it was okay. So
So last episode, we left off in Reno, where we had met up with John and Annie. And after that, we drove the Pony Express Road and we visited the Buffalo Bill Museum. In episode 3, we talked about how important Buffalo Bill was to us. His paratheatrical work, the ultimate maybe, is what inspired us so greatly. And remarkably, along with all of the other legendary accomplishments, another story has it that the young William F. Cody, at the age of 16, also rode the longest Pony Express ride in that story's history. The Pony Express didn't last very long, but it has a very storied place in American history. He supposedly rode nonstop for 300 miles when some of the other relay riders fell away, right?
And then after that, we headed from there to back to South Dakota and the Black Hills. And we stopped to see the ancient petroglyphs that were all around, including the one that Leola had told us about. And it was Eagle's Point, and it was a circle with a cross in it, right?
Right, yes, a circle with like a plus sign inside it, which is also the basis of the swastika, of course. It's a very ancient symbol. You see it in a lot of different cultures. We saw it a lot, for instance, when we visited India. You see it all over the place there. And of course, the Nazis appropriated it, right?
Yeah, so back in the Black Hills on Christmas Day, we hiked up Harney's Peak.
Which is also known as Eagle's Point.
Oh, which was renamed as Black Elk Peak in, I think, 2016.
Yes.
And this is where Black Elk had his vision. He called it the center of the earth. And Black Elk Peak is the highest point east of the Continental Divide.
Yes.
So on the way up there, there was a wolf that crossed our path. We thought it was a dog at first, and I whistled, and then we saw it was a wolf, but it just turned its head and just moseyed on.
Yes, and then at the end of the trail, meaning, at the end of our hike, back at the beginning of the trail, we saw a herd of like 8 deer that were 10 feet away from us. I guess they were so used to people, but it was a really magical Christmas day.
Yeah, it was crazy because it was like unseasonably like 50 degrees or something, and sunny and everything. Yeah.
And of course, the landscape itself was just breathtaking. It just was an amazing day. Okay, so about the Wounded Knee Massacre. It marked the symbolic end of what were called the Indian Wars that had been going on for centuries. There were actually more wars. There were the Apache Wars as late as 1924, which always fascinated me because to me, 1924 is the modern era, right? Their films were already being made, but there were still Indian Wars going on. But it's the Wounded Knee Massacre that, if not officially, but emblematically, brought those wars to a close because of what it represented. The Native American genocide seemed complete, right?
Right. And there's a lot to be said about the massacre. It's a devastating story, and we're only going to give the broad strokes here. The context in which our tipi was memorializing, what we were trying to memorialize.
So in 1869, the Treaty of Fort Laramie established a 60 million acre Great Sioux Reservation, it was called. The agreement was that if the Lakota stayed on the reservation and refrained from attacking white settlers, that they would be provided with food, with education, other government-funded benefits. But then gold was discovered in the Black Hills, right? And all bets were off. And then, it was one of the many, many treaties that the American government broke with Native Americans. The land was strip mined. The one Great Sioux Reservation was split up into 6 different smaller ones.
And then in 1889, Congress slashed the annual Lakota food rations. And that combined with a harsh winter and a severe drought, and the fact that the land itself was never really arable. The buffalo were all gone now, right? And, it pushed the tribe to the brink of starvation.
Which then, of course, was fertile ground for this ghost dance religion to take hold in Pine Ridge.
Yeah, and this ghost dance ritual that they were doing really scared the whites. For example, the agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs asked for more real military reinforcements, and this just heightened the tensions.
Even more, yeah. So then on December 29th, 1890, there was a scuffle at Wounded Knee Creek where the Lakota had set up their teepees. Supposedly the army was trying to confiscate their weapons, and there was a deaf Lakota warrior who wasn't following instructions and shot accidentally went off, and that's when the army gave orders to fire.
Yeah, and by the time it was over, there were 153 Lakota killed, dead, mostly women and children, and just as many more injured. And, the exact numbers are never really calculated on that. But
Yeah, well, they vary from different sources. But the massacre was initially referred to as the Battle of Wounded Knee. American Indians hated that, of course, that description, and they refer to it as the massacre at Wounded Knee. The location of the conflict is officially known as the Wounded Knee battlefield. And the U.S. Army currently refers to it as just Wounded Knee. All this to say that the designation of what happened is its own kind of battlefield.
Right, and the signs, look at the signs. For instance, the Battle of Wounded Knee sign, you can't really find, even though there's all kind of history sites, PBS, everybody does a little section on...
Yeah, this is really weird.
Yeah, the Wounded Knee Massacre. The sign, the Battle of Wounded Knee, you can only find one photograph of that, and it shows the sign with the word battle graffitied over with the word massacre. And the photo was taken in 1972 or 73 when the siege was going on.
Yes,
and that's
the
the only
second
sign.
Wounded Knee, right? And that's the only thing we could find. It's
right.
The strangest thing. All right, so the Black Hills to this day are considered Holy Land by the Lakota. They do not believe in land bridges. They believe they originated in the Black Hills. None of this about North America being populated by Asians walking across the Bering Straits, which is sort of the commonly held theory.
No, the Lakota were born in the Black Hills.
Yes. And of course they felt like their holy land was being desecrated by the whites. It would be like some foreign culture going in, taking over, strip mining Jerusalem, right? And it wasn't until 1980 that the U.S. government agreed that the lands were illegally taken, and they offered the Lakota reparations, but they refused the settlement.
Right, and the money was put into an interest-bearing account, and I think in 2015 it was worth, $1.2 billion or something like that. But the Lakota, they want the land back. They don't want money.
Yeah. So during our road trip, we stayed in the Black Hills at the historic Franklin Hotel in Deadwood, South Dakota. Pine Ridge from there was a 5-hour round trip excursion from Deadwood. So it was an all-day thing when we visited Pine Ridge, but it was convenient for our exploration of the Black Hills. And one of those explorations took us to the Crazy Horse Monument. And I just want to say, I said this the last time, but there was no GPS, there was no Google, so we didn't know about this.
Yeah, and it wasn't really on tourist brochures and stuff at that time.
No, not yet. It was in a very early stage.
Well, not that early.
Well, not that early.
I mean, because it was in 1939.
Compared to now, I mean.
Right. But it began in 1939 when this Polish-American sculptor named Korczak Ziolkowski.
Yes.
Right. He had won first prize at the New York, the 1939 World's Fair.
World's Fair, yes, New York.
Which was in New York.
Yeah.
And the fame he got from this, and he also knew the Black Hills very well, but it prompted a few Lakota chiefs, including Chief Henry Standing Bear, who was a maternal cousin of Crazy Horse, to petition Korczak to make a monument honoring Crazy Horse. Standing Bear wrote to Korczak and said, "My fellow chiefs and I would like the white man to know the red man has great heroes too." So
yes. So after meeting with the chiefs, Korczak agreed, and he began searching for a suitable mountain for the sculpture. He thought the Wyoming Tetons would be the best choice because the rock would be better for carving, but the Lakota wanted it in their sacred Black Hills on this 600-foot high mountain
right,
that they had chosen.
Yeah, and the monument, when completed, is expected to be the world's largest mountain carving.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be 563 feet high and 641 feet long. He's got models of it that he's made all over. And Crazy Horse's head, which is completed right now,
Yes.
is large enough to contain
All of Mount Rushmore.
Yeah,
It's mind-boggling.
all the 60
Just his head, Crazy
Right.
Horse's head.
Yeah,
right?
so all the 4 presidents, 60-foot high heads will fit inside Crazy Horse's
Yeah.
head, which is cool.
It's nuts. Come on, the whole thing is just, I don't know. Especially the way this started, right? This lone little Polish sculptor started hammering away by himself at the mountain, and his goal was to carve an image of Crazy Horse sitting on his horse with one arm outstretched right in front of him, and then afterwards, when it was all done, he wanted to build a university for Native Americans on the site.
Yeah, and I guess paradoxically,
You think?
no one knows what Crazy Horse looked like.
Yes. No one knows.
Right. Yeah, he thought that a photograph would steal your soul. So he never allowed any photographs of him. And, so I don't know. What did Korczak...
Where did he get the image of Crazy Horse?
Yeah, in his
from his
imagination,
I guess,
right.
Anyway, he was already in his 40s when he began carving the mountain. And he married one of the volunteers that was working with him. And that marriage produced 10 children who were all born in a small cabin on the site.
Yeah, and what's also amazing, he didn't think he could have kids because he had a
Previous marriage.
Right.
Yeah. And he figured when he started that it would probably be at least 3 generations before the mountain was even carved, so his kids would have to finish it. Especially because the funding came only from the visitor center, where the public pays admission and buys trinkets and stuff, and so it would be slow going.
Yeah, not just his kids, but his kids, 3 generations he was counting on.
Yeah.
So good thing he had 10 kids. But, he was a firm believer in the free enterprise system and against any kind of government funding. To this day, the family turns down sometimes pretty sizable amounts, $10 million in one case.
Yeah.
So as not to be beholden to Washington or anybody else.
Yes, Washington, right? You don't want to be in bed with Washington on a project like this.
With Native Americans, the genocide. Yeah, right.
Obvious reasons, right?
Anyway, when we first got to the visitor center, we met Jay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Jay was a Bronx-born Jew, former retired UPS driver, and he decided to dedicate his life to Korczak's vision and to his oldest daughter, Dawn. And we spoke to Dawn and Jay for a long time about each other's work, and we were each very excited of how much we had in common. One of the things being, of course, 4 white people creating monuments, memorials to the Lakota. And the intention behind both of our missions was very similar.
Right.
So we felt...
Yeah, right. At the first explosion at the mountain, Korczak, of course, dedicated to Native Americans, he said, I want a little bit of the wrong that they did to these people corrected, right?
Yes, so we of course could relate to that. Then we went back to visit Wounded Knee, and we brought up Crazy Horse Mountain to Leola and Percy. And Leola just rejected it outright.
Yeah, she saw it as not an honor, but a dishonor and a further desecration to the Black Hills. What was surprising, though, was that Percy had exactly the opposite view. And they voiced like a short kind of, well, it was a friendly argument, but a short argument in front of us about this, right?
Right. And overall, like, I'm not sure about back then, back in 1991, but now the Lakota Nation is equally divided on it. Those opposed to the memorial argue that a man that was so adamantly against having his picture taken, even captured on film, would not want a likeness of himself sprawled across the face of a sacred mountain. And the fact that he wished to be buried in an undisclosed grave, to them, is proof of that.
Right. I mean, however, there's many Native Americans who love the monument. Percy, of course, being one. They love its scale and its kind of brazen affront to the symbolism that is part of Mount Rushmore.
Yes.
Very close. Mount Rushmore is only 16 miles away. So,
you can see both sides, for sure.
Right. And, they love the way that the Crazy Horse Memorial stakes its claim on American history, almost as a counterpoint to Mount Rushmore and the heads of the white fathers of democracy, that's nearby.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's going to be, when it's completed, the largest mountain carving in the world.
Exactly. It's interesting to note, by the way, the history of the carving of Mount Rushmore. I had no idea about any of this.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It was originally envisioned as an ode to the Old West. It was supposed to be carvings of pioneers, of Native Americans, historic figures like Lewis and Clark and their Indian guide Sacagawea. But then the sculptor that was hired, Gutzon Borglum, rejected this design. And it was his vision that was going to transform it into what the mountain is today.
Right, and to put this sculpture in his vision,
Sculptor
in vision into a context. Just a year before, he was working on another project.
Yes.
Another gigantic, vast sculpture that was being carved in Stone Mountain. And he had been...
outside of Atlanta. This
Right.
is Georgia.
Yeah, and he had been commissioned by the United Daughters of the Confederacy to do this. And it was being funded by the Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
All this came about because in 1915 was the film...
The Birth of the Nation.
Right, that sort of revitalized Ku Klux Klan.
Yes.
I mean, the Ku Klux Klan at that time were having their rituals and everything else at Stone Mountain. So, I mean, the site was laden
and
with...
weren't they in decline until the Birth of the Nation came out?
Yeah. I mean, that was, that was America's first blockbuster. And the white people in Atlanta just flocked to that show.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was said that a quarter of the population of the white people in Atlanta went and saw that show.
Oh my God.
It was just, incredible. But yeah, so, you got the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Ku Klux Klan. It's debated on whether Burglum became a Klan member or not. He's listed on some of the charters and stuff, but
a Klan member?
Ku Klux Klan member.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's how he was built.
Well, he was definitely sympathetic.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Stone Mountain in its natural self is, the largest exposed granite outcrop in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So a natural wonder by itself. But now it's going to be turned into a Confederate monument.
Mm-hmm.
And just before he got hired by Rushmore, he started carving that. And that was in 1923. I think Rushmore started, he got hired in 1924. And he started carving that. And actually, the carving, he got fired from it eventually. Or he went on to move to Rushmore. And
it started out as just being Robert E. Lee, right?
Right.
And then they sandblasted that away.
They sandblasted away. Two other designers came in. 50 years later, in 1972, only in 1972 was it completed. And it depicts three Confederate figures, Civil War figures on horseback. There's President Jefferson Davis, and the generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson.
So Lee made it up there after all.
Yeah, he did. He's on horseback now, and it's not just him, right?
Yeah.
This Stone Mountain carving, the park itself is protected by state law. So you see all these other Confederate
monuments being taken down.
Yeah, this is...
It's very complicated, right? Because the daughters of, what are they called? The Daughters of the Revolution?
No, the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Confederacy, right.
Yeah, they come out with a statement now today with all these monuments coming down, statues coming down, that they're against any kind of hate groups or white supremacy groups.
Appropriating these monuments for their purposes.
And they give us somewhat, I think, whatever statement saying that they want to honor their ancestors.
Yes.
Their fathers,
Yes.
I mean...
And honestly, I can relate to that.
Right.
As a German who dearly loved her grandfather, who was a soldier in World War II.
Not a Nazi.
Not a Nazi, but a conscripted soldier. When I moved to this country, I always hated it when people automatically assumed he was a Nazi and evil. He was the man that meant most to me. So if you extrapolate that to these people just wanting to honor, because if you think about it, the Civil War was not that long ago. It was not that long ago.
Right.
And how many? 600,000 people died? Something like that? But so any case, this idea of memorializing your ancestors, memorializing the dead.
Yeah, well, I mean, how did we build this memorial? It was for the Wounded Knee Massacre.
Yes.
The people who had died there. But it was also, we were bringing everything of ourselves in there too.
Yes, our own memory, our own memorials.
Right. And I think if you look at these three large memorials, I mean, the Stone Mountain carving is bigger. I think it's 3 acres. It's bigger than Mount Rushmore.
Yes.
This Confederate monument. If you look at these three, all of them are saying these people are heroes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Crazy Horse, and then the 4 presidents, and then
2 of whom were slave owners.
Right.
But it gets complicated.
Yeah, monuments will come and go.
Yes.
Depending on who believes their ancestors is more whatever.
And anytime you make anything that definitive, it's going to divide people.
Right. And so, well, that's memorials, right?
Right.
But anyway, this was Berglund's vision was coming out of this Shrine of the South. And he said something incredible about what he thought the vision of Rushmore should be.
Yes.
Which is, he said it should be an unambiguous symbol of male manifest destiny.
That is a direct quote. An unambiguous symbol of male manifest destiny. That's saying a lot.
I think somebody had wanted to put Susan B. Anthony up there or something, right? But it's going to be male.
Yes.
And it's going to be about manifest destiny. So that's...
so no Sacagawea, no Susan B. Anthony.
No, Jefferson, because he bought the Louisiana Purchase and expanded the country by doubled it, right? Mm-hmm. And Washington, of course, as the beginner. And then, even Lincoln supported, I don't know, I forget exactly what it is, but in some kind of thing, taking over Native American land.
Right. Some people want to cancel Lincoln. It's mind-boggling how complicated all of this gets, right? Including on our tiny little scale of us putting up a memorial, right, for whatever. So
but I mean, if you think back about the original design of Rushmore, where Sacagawea and other Native Americans were supposed to be depicted there, including Red Cloud, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's turned into this manifest destiny thing.
Yes.
Right. So
the white fathers of democracy.
Right.
So it's
the white fathers of manifest destiny. I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, right.
But so Crazy Horse Mountain really would, or really does, sit as a complete stark counterpoint to these.
Yes, a gigantic, all-consuming of Mount Rushmore stark counterpoint. So you could see why some Native Americans
wanted
it, right?
Yeah.
So we met Jay and Dawn for dinner at Deadwood and continued our initial conversation, and it was really lively and really rewarding. And at that time we brought up the Iroquois notion of the seventh generation principle, and something that we were pretty versed in through all of the research, meanwhile, that we had done, but they did not seem to be that familiar with it. And we brought it up because we felt like it applied to them, planning something for generations down the line. So we felt like it was a perfect depiction of what they were doing.
Right, and the principle is based on an ancient Iroquois philosophy where our actions should not be judged by their immediate effect today, but their effect on the seventh generation. And this philosophy I've been watered down or marketed. Somebody stole the seventh generation, branded it. It's now dish soap and everything else.
Sold in plastic bottles.
Yeah.
And green and.
But I mean, the principle is still there.
Yeah, well, everybody knows about it now. Let's put it that way. And it was first recorded, this seventh generation principle, back and in like anywhere from 1142 to 1500 AD is where they placed it. And it goes back to the writings of the great law of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And it's credited with influencing the American Constitution, of all things, because Benjamin Franklin had great respect for the Haudenosaunee system of government. And of course, the Iroquois Confederacy was like, what, 6 different...
Well, 5 and then 6 nations.
Yeah, so it was extremely successful.
Yeah, you could see the comparison to the 13 colonies, trying to bring them together, right?
And keep them together. So it's no wonder that Franklin took a close look at this. But it's interesting to think that the Constitution in the United States is not founded on principles of European governments, but of people that they, at that point, considered, quote, savages.
Yeah, at that time, that's what they're...
Yeah.
So Dawn and Jay just loved the fact that we were, appreciated the fact that we were comparing the seventh generation principle to their work on Crazy Horse. And back then, there was the idea that Korczak had, which was to build a Native American school, but it still hadn't come about when we were there in 1991. But then 20 years later, in 2010, we looked it up recently, they started the Indian University of North America. And their first program was a summer program called 7th Gen. And we like to think that our conversation back then was the instigator in some way of it.
Yeah, it's probably...
Well, I mean, they were so excited
about it. We'd like
about
to think of that, yes.
No, they were very excited to hear about it.
Yeah,
I mean, they hadn't heard about it, it seemed like to us.
Right. And Dawn told us not just about the history of the mountain, but she told us like some personal family stories, which were really fun. Her father's first marriage fell apart because apparently his first wife thought he was spending too much time doing this mountain, and she didn't appreciate that, right? So,
and she couldn't give him any children, so maybe that's part of it.
That's part of it probably too, right? And in 1950, he then married Ruth Ross, that volunteer that we had talked about earlier, and she was 18 years his junior.
Right.
And
they got married on Thanksgiving Day.
Yes.
So they wouldn't interrupt any of the work.
Yes, on a holiday. Because you can't take any time out, not even for a wedding.
And Ruth told the press at one time that Korczak had informed her that the mountain would be first, she'd be second, and the children would be third.
The children third, right?
And she said that's why, you can see why we had so many children too, because the boys were expected then to be working on the mountain, and the girls were going to be working the visitor center.
Yeah,
center.
God bless Ruth, boy. The mountain first, her second, and her kids third.
Right.
The morning before we left to drive back to New York, So this was now December 29th, the anniversary of the massacre. We stopped one more time at Crazy Horse, and Jay ceremoniously presented us with a rock, a fragment from the blast of Crazy Horse Memorial. And we felt very honored by this gift, and all of us expressed fervent hope of seeing each other again.
And this stone became important to us to keep, and becomes part of this story later. Right?
Yeah.
And after that, we drove down to the Pine Ridge Reservation, and we picked up Bernard, or Shorty.
Yeah, he says, call me Shorty.
Right. And he was walking the 40 miles or so to Manderson to go to a wake. Of course, he knew, like we saw all the time and heard, that they just pick up people. You start walking and somebody will pick you up, right? And well, we picked him up, and we told him a little bit about ourselves. We gave him the postcard of the tipi, and he told us about, well, he started reminiscing about the 73 siege, and he showed us some points of interest, including a short path to the site where the siege took place.
Right, yeah. And along the way, it was really stunning. We saw some Chief Bigfoot Band memorial riders on horseback. What that's all about is after Sitting Bull was killed 2 weeks before the Wounded Knee Massacre, Chief Bigfoot fled Standing Rock Reservation and went to Pine Ridge, only to die in the massacre. And every year on the anniversary, people take a memorial horseback ride along that same route that Chief Bigfoot took. And then we dropped Shorty off at the church, and he waved a very confused but heartfelt goodbye. Of course, he didn't know what to make of us.
Yeah.
Duh.
And then we drove back to the massacre site and went out near the creek there, the Wounded Knee Creek, and we carved and painted some beads we had bought in Rapid City. We used the water from the Wounded Knee Creek to thin the paint, and then we strung the beads together on some rawhide. And I mean, we deliberately chose the site and the anniversary of the massacre to make these necklaces. And we completed this ritual right at dusk.
Right. And then we had one bead left over, which we threw ceremoniously into the creek. An offering, but maybe more than that, maybe an entreaty to the waters, to the land, to the dead buried there at Wounded Knee, to please accept our memorial and endow the necklaces with the power of that acceptance.
Right. We were talking to the dead because the living had rejected the memorial.
Yeah.
I mean, at least Leola had.
Leola
At
just
some point, we had said we wanted to
come back and gift it. And
yeah.
she just rejected it outright, which was stab in the heart.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was the main thing. We went on the trip and everything. So we were coming back, hopefully with the dead, with the necklaces, and there was some kind of acceptance. Anyway, that's what we were hoping was coming out of it.
Yeah.
And we would bring them back to New York and gift them to our friends on the hill. And then, driving down the road, there was a radio program commemorating the 101st
anniversary of the massacre, and
Right.
we listened to that.
Right.
So there's just one more story that I want to tell, because it's going to figure, it comes off of Leola's rejection, but it's going to figure prominently down the line a little bit. And it still haunts me to this day. On December 23rd, so 2 days before Christmas, Nick wanted to walk the Wounded Knee Creek, but I decided to look up Leola one more time by myself. She was pretty suspicious of us when we first got there, especially of me, and I felt like she just kept looking at me sideways and looking at me, askance, and she didn't like the fact that I was German. Although she did talk about then...
Oh yeah, she said she had a German visitor
who was learning the Lakota language.
And she was very, proud of that, or, saying that was cool. There's Germans too that learn the Lakota language that aren't Nazis like you.
Like me.
You're right. Yeah.
At least that's how I felt.
Right,
You got
right.
that vibe too, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I felt like I threatened her as a woman, that I angered her as a white person, and of course really annoyed her with our purpose, right? What could a white woman know about Wounded Knee and tipis and Lakota? So I felt really self-conscious right from the start. And I guess I thought I could fix that, change her mind about me, so I went back. Well, big mistake. First of all, Nick and I are not pot smokers, but she and I got high on some weed that Annie and John had given us to give to Leola when we went back, when we had met them in Reno, right? And it made her super comfortable, but it made me completely paranoid. First, also, I felt like she kept looking at my hand, at this diamond ring I was wearing, which I'm conflicted about too. It was a present from Nick, spurred on, not organically by Nick, not even remotely, right? Or even by me back then. But it's...
No, I gave it to you I remember when I gave it to you in Niagara Falls, right early when we had met, saying, I'm going to marry you someday.
Yes, you proposed to me on one knee at Niagara Falls. It was very romantic.
Right, the way you're supposed to do it, right.
Especially when you come from working class, middle America, right. It's a way of signaling to the woman's parents the seriousness of a man's intentions, right? Engagement. So we did that whole ritual. So I had my little diamond ring, and then I had our little rental car, which was shiny and bright and new, of course, as rental cars are. It was only a Geo. It wasn't exactly, but anyway, in those surroundings, it felt like it was just highlighting the poverty and the subjugation that was so palpable all over the reservation. In any case, I just felt asinine. Like an ugly American, right? I felt dilettante. I felt really stupid. And of course, mostly I was high and paranoid. And I wanted so much for Leola, if not to sanction what we were doing, but to at least appreciate the sincerity of our intentions. And I wanted to learn from her. She is the foremost expert authority on Lakota issues. And she has this fascinating background. She was a member of AIM during the occupation in '73. She was wanted by the FBI for a while. She believed that the spirits rendered her and her husband invisible during that time so that they would be protected. Anyway, there was so much to learn. And I tried too hard, I guess, to change her mind about me. She had made up her mind about me, and it just backfired. And also I was in her territory with her large family, and I think there were some friends there too. So I felt trapped. I ended up leaving sad and humiliated, and she made no effort whatsoever to change that. She didn't care whether I came or went.
Right. I mean, it was kind of raw back then. I think you're relating how you felt back then.
Yeah.
How do you feel now about it? I mean, because...
Well, yeah. I mean
we're now looking at all this 30 years later.
Trying to come to terms with it all.
Right. And what it meant to us.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, for one thing, lesson number one is if you're trying to have meaningful conversations with somebody on sensitive topics, don't get high. Also, it just put this searing hot spotlight on my own misgivings about what we were doing. She was skeptical, right? With good reason. But the thing that devastated me is that I saw no credible way of defending myself. I had no sense of self at all. I was just like, okay, yeah. I guess everything I'm doing is stupid and disrespectful of you, and yeah. And that's a thing that was so devastating to me. And no, not today. Not today.
Mm.
But looking back on it, Anyway, the next day was going to be Christmas Eve. We drove back to Wounded Knee, those 300 miles round trip from Deadwood, and we had bought some presents for kids that we had wrapped, and we dropped them off on Leola's porch without knocking or anything, and hoping that it made her happy and not even more annoyed, right?
Right. I mean, we weren't going to see her again, I don't think.
No, not
Right.
under these circumstances. And then we pulled over in the prairie. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And we walked hand in hand in complete and utter darkness. Of course, there's no man-made light anywhere nearby, under the stars, directly towards a howling coyote. And that felt like an omen. It was, yes, very ominous. And I will never forget it because of that. And thinking back now, the trip was kind of the beginning of the unraveling of our center. And from there on out, things kept going south on the hill.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, next episode, I think we will be examining this kind of unraveling you're talking about. And but we'd like to end this episode with a quote from Black Elk, the medicine man. He witnessed Wounded Knee, and this is a quote from his autobiography, Black Elk Speaks. It's a poignant summary of what the implications of this event was on the tribe as a whole.
And an appropriate way to end this episode. I did not know then how much was ended. When I look back now from this high hill of my old age, I can still see the butchered women and children lying heaped and scattered all along the crooked gulch, as plain as when I saw them with eyes still young. And I can see that something else died there in the bloody mud and was buried in the blizzard. A people's dream died there. It was a beautiful dream. And I, to whom so great a vision was given in my youth, you see me now, a pitiful old man who has done nothing. For the nation's hoop is broken and scattered. There is no center any longer, and the sacred tree is dead.
Yeah. All right. And
as always, feel free to write us on this or any topic at podcast@thievestheater.org. We'd love to hear from you.
yeah, thank you for listening to The Hill by Thieves Theater. And if you'd like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you know when the next episode is coming up.
Yes, and check out our website at thievestheater.org and follow us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at tipi on the hill. That's TIPI on the hill. Thanks for listening, everybody. Till next time.